Are you ready to turn your podcast into a lead generator and revenue driver? Welcome to Influential Voices of Authority. It's the podcast for coaches, consultants, and experts who are ready to stop spending so much time and energy creating a podcast that isn't working and instead turn your podcast into a tool to grow your business and your status and impact in your industry. Hey, I'm your host, Erik K. Johnson, podcast talent coach and media veteran. In each episode of the show, I sit down with industry leaders to uncover how they use their voice, their message, and their platform to build trust, grow their audience, and attract premium clients. If you're ready to turn your voice into your greatest asset, you're in the right place. Welcome to Influential Voices of Authority. You know, I often talk to podcasters who are struggling to grow their audience and attract their ideal clients. And in order to grow your business, you need to get yourself in front of people who don't already know you. There are two sides of the equation when it comes to growing your audience and growing your business. One, you need to keep the people who are already in your circle coming back again and again. And then two, you need to get more of those people to come into the funnel. You have to serve both sides of that equation if you want to grow. Keep your current, go get more. All right. So many people focus too much on keeping the current. They're posting on social media. They're sending an email to their list. I want you to keep doing that. But when you do, you're talking to people who already know you. What are you doing to go get in front of people who don't yet know you, who don't know what you're all about? They are not familiar with your superpower. They don't know how you can solve their problems. You need to go get in front of people who don't already know you. And the way to do that is to find partners who can put you in front of the right audience. You're not looking for any audience. You're not looking for the biggest audience. You're looking for the right audience. You want the right audience with the right message at the right time. That leads to clients. You can't just go out and talk to anybody. You need to find partners who are already speaking to your ideal clients. Who already has them in their audience? You're not looking for the largest audience. You're looking for the best audience, the best fit. It's quality over quantity. So who in your niche is already speaking to your ideal audience? And I know a lot of people think, well, they're my competitors. I can't go partner with my competitors. They're not all competitors. You want to find people serving your audience in a complementary way. They serve your audience, but they do something a little different than you do. Maybe you help entrepreneurs build their funnel. Maybe this person helps them with their Facebook ads, or maybe they help them with their bookkeeping or their accounting. Maybe they help them with their website. There's a lot of people serving that same entrepreneurial niche, but just in a different way. You need to find those experts and partner with them because they already have your ideal client in their audience. So these partners could be podcast hosts. They could have YouTube channels. They might host summits or other virtual events. They might be doing Facebook Lives and they need guests for that. They post on social media and they might have an audience there. They could have a great email list. They could promote you through their email list. And you can get creative as well. Matter of fact, right now I'm working with a partner. She's writing a book, and in the book, she has featured experts on different pieces, different niches. And so I'm going to be her featured expert as an expert on podcasting and how to use podcasting to grow your business. I'm going to be featured in her book. She's going to put me in front of her audience of coaches and consultants. And it's just another way for me to get exposure to people who don't already know who I am. So it's not necessarily the biggest audience that you're looking for. You're looking for the right audience. You want quality over quantity. The right audience is so much better than the bigger audience. Be in the right room. Get in the right room, talking to the right people, have the right message, and make it the right time. One great way to do it, one of my favorite ways, because I love podcasting, is to be a guest on other podcasts. Because I know this sounds crazy and it sounds very elementary, but podcast listeners listen to podcasts. So if you're trying to attract people to your podcast and grow your audience, go get on other podcasts. The average podcast consumer listens to half a dozen different podcasts every week. Over 30% listen to more than 11 different podcasts a week. You should be one of those. Go get on other podcasts. Podcast guesting is such a powerful way to grow your exposure, your visibility, and your expertise. Show people what you're all about and bring them into your world. And that's why I've invited Kristen Nolan on the show today. She's from Interview Valet. She joins us today to help us understand the true power of being a guest on another podcast and how to be the best guest. Not just any guest, but the best guest. It's a great interview. Kristen has built her career on one simple truth. It's authentic connection. And authentic connection drives results. And that's what she's all about. It's a fantastic conversation. With over a decade of corporate sales and account management experience across tech and retail, she now leverages those relationships and that relationship expertise as senior client account manager at Interview Valet, where she transforms podcast interviews into strategic revenue engines. And isn't that what we're all looking for? Kristen doesn't just book guests. She architects comprehensive interview marketing campaigns. She identifies target audiences. She aligns messaging and host demographics. And she builds conversion funnels that turn listeners into leads and, more importantly, into customers. That's what this interview is all about. Enjoy my conversation with Kristen Nolan. Kristen, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me, Erik.
Absolutely. You have a great story. Tell me how you went from corporate sales into the podcasting industry. How does that happen?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty interesting story. I was a stay-at-home mom in between my corporate sales job. And so I stayed home for quite some time and COVID happened and my son was struggling with reading. And I went to my husband and I said, hey, I think I want to shift him into private school. And so my husband was like, well, if we want to do that, you have to go back to work. And so the very first, job that I found was with Interview Valet, and it has been such a great blessing to me. I have been with Interview Valet for 4 years as of about a week ago.
Oh, wow. Congratulations on the 4-year anniversary.
Yeah, thank you.
What, how much were you into podcasting before you took the job with Interview Valet?
So I hadn't even listened to a podcast. Don't tell Tom. It was so, I mean, like I had heard about podcasts, but I hadn't like listened to them, as like I was, a mom. So I was just busy, my kids kind of control everything. So I didn't really get to listen to a lot of things, but now I do. I listen to my clients' podcasts and a lot of different things. So yeah.
What's been as you've kind of discovered the industry and kind of peeled the onion, what's been the most effective way for you to learn about the industry and about the effective strategies that a lot of people use?
So I actually am one of like there's a couple of us client account managers within Interview Valet that do guesting. So I have clients and I work with them, but I also get to kind of stand alongside of them and learn what it's like to be a guest. And I'm always, listening to new podcasts, following trends, meeting new people. And so that's how I'm kind of staying on top of what's going on within the industry.
When you were learning about the industry and kind of just getting your feet underneath you, what's the one thing that you discovered that you were like, holy cow, I didn't even realize that happens in this industry?
Yeah, well, I think with podcasting, one of the great things that I think is super cool that the podcast industry has that no other has is that it's really like you have an opportunity, like if you're an introvert, right? So maybe you don't enjoy, talking in front of big crowds. If you're an introvert, you can have a conversation. Like, maybe I don't enjoy going and standing up in front of a group of 1,000 people, but I can have a conversation with you, just you and I can still have an impact where I don't have to do those things that maybe make me nervous or would make me, not want to do something like that.
Yeah. Have you seen that come to life in one of your clients where you're like, it's okay, you're just having a one-on-one conversation?
Yeah, it's funny. I have quite a few clients that come to me and they're not, they're CEOs, they're authors, they're very, very successful people, and the thought of being in front of a big audience is a struggle to them. And so what we do is I'm able to sort of strategize and coach them. So I learn about my clients, and then I help put together, we'll do mock interviews. I will put together what we call a podcast prep document, where I will custom tailor different techniques for them based on the podcast that they're on. So I'm not giving them a general document like, hey, here's how to do this. I'm giving them a custom one based on the audience that they're going to be speaking to, so that they can have the most impact.
Can you give me an example of a particular client that you helped that really used podcast guesting to grow their authority in their space?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a client, and she came to me, and she wanted all of the questions beforehand. She wanted, to know what the topic was going to be. And I will often get this where I have clients and they want to know kind of everything up front. And, some hosts are willing to give them that, but in some cases they're not. So what I did kind of from a strategy perspective is the hosts that were willing to provide that information, we did it on the front end, so she could get a couple of interviews under her belt where she felt comfortable. And then once she was able to get in a better groove where she felt good about the stories that she was telling, and she felt good about the content that she was sharing, that she could then move in and do those podcasts that maybe seemed a little more daunting to her. And she didn't have, the questions beforehand. So it was more kind of on the fly for her. And so it helped her be more confident in her answers and different things like that. So it translated to her being able to, speak better in front of, larger groups, or in front of, people that she was speaking with, because she was an executive coach.
That's great.
Mhm.
Yeah, when people ask me for the questions that I'm going to ask them, I tell them I don't have questions that I'm going to ask you. I kind of have a structure of where we're going with the interview, and we're going to have a conversation. And so it's like when
Yeah.
I show up to a cocktail party, I don't have a list of questions in my pocket. Like, I don't know what you and I are going to talk about. You're
Yeah.
interesting, and I'm going to figure out why.
Yeah, well, and I think, and I've been on the guesting side, so I've seen it both ways. I mean, I had a host give me, I think it was like 25 questions that we were going to go over. And I mean, I was like sweating, because I was like, okay, I got to get on to the next one. So it was like, okay, I got to, I know I have 12 others to answer from here. So in my mind, it was like I'm answering questions, and it's not a free-flowing conversation. And I personally feel that the best podcasts that I listen to, and I'm probably going to sound like a little bit of a creepy person here, but it sounds like you're in a coffee shop, and you're just listening to two people at the table next to you have a conversation, and it brings value to you. So those are the type of podcast episodes that I like to listen to.
Yeah, you're just the third person at the table in a conversation. You
Yeah.
mentioned you helped your clients get more comfortable with her stories and that sort
Mhm.
of thing during her interviews. How important are stories when somebody's given an interview?
Oh, I think they're very important, because if you don't have stories, the people listening can't see themselves in what you offer. They can't connect to what you're talking about. You're talking at them versus having a connection with them. So if you're able to tell an authentic story, and I often tell my clients, a lot of times hosts will say, well, tell me about yourself. Tell us how you got to where you are today. And a lot of times people will recite their resume. I did this. I was listening to a podcast once, and the guy started talking about what he did in high school. And I'm like, no one's listening to you, right? You're 5 minutes in and you're giving your life story. No one cares. So if you're able to weave a story where you highlight, your product or your service, then people that are listening can see themselves in what you're talking about, and they turn you up versus turn you off. And so you really establish that connection very early on, and then you just continue to tell those stories throughout, and it helps people connect with you on a deeper level.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those connections. What is it about being a guest on another podcast and being interviewed that allows you to turn those conversations into those connections and eventually into those clients and customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the big things is that you automatically have the host support, right? So, the host has an audience that they've curated. And so, by them choosing you to be a guest, that means that they've vetted you. That means that you automatically have that authority to be on their podcast. So, I think it's really critical that, you kind of know that going in. So, when my clients come to me and they're, as we mentioned before, they're a little, shaky, or, maybe less confident. I often remind them of that, right? So you have that authority to show up, and you have, the ability to share what you have to offer the audience. Um, and so I think, really just having that confidence to show up is really important.
Yeah, you're building that rapport, right? You're letting the audience get to know who you are and what you're all about, what you value and what you believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do like a 30-second commercial, you're spending 30 seconds talking about your product or your service. When you're on a podcast interview or a podcast episode, people really get a feel for what's important to you, who you are. They know you and they like you and they trust you before they ever reach out to you. So there's an immediate um, you know, I guess, knowledge of who you are and what you stand for and what you're offering them going into it. So it shortens kind of, if you're looking at it from a sales cycle, it shortens the sales cycle, because they know who you are. You're not selling yourself. They know who you are. And it's almost like, you're a friend. I've never bought something from a cold LinkedIn message, right? But if I hear someone on a podcast and I like what they have to say and I think they're, someone that I would enjoy working with, that makes it a much easier connection.
Give me an example of somebody that you've worked with where you've seen this process work really well, where they really implemented, they went all in on the podcast guesting strategy, and you saw it really have a positive effect on their business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I had a previous client. He was in the law firm growth space, and he was able to.
So does that mean he helps law firms expand, helps them grow and gain more clients and that sort of thing?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So,
All right.
and so he was on a podcast, and he was able to, just from one person listening to him on that particular podcast, he was able to close a $90,000 deal with that
Holy
client.
cow.
Yeah, he's a
On one interview.
one interview, right? So and that's what it's really about. It's about getting you in front of the right people. I think sometimes people think, I want to be on the big podcast, I want to be on
Right.
Joe Rogan. We actually find that that's not the best strategy. We want to get you in front of the right people, that are your people. And so that's why when I have a client that comes to me and says, I want to get in front of entrepreneurs, I'm like, that's great. Tell me more. Let's niche down a little bit. That's really broad. What is your definition of an entrepreneur? And so we really get to talk the strategy around that. But going back to clients that do all of the right things, right? They show up, they sound great. A lot of times people will think that, they show up, they record a podcast, the recording ends, and they move on. I actually don't think that that's the best approach to it. I think that's very transactional. I'm often teaching and coaching my clients that you have so many more opportunities even beyond the podcast interview, that if a host is your has your ideal target audience, they know other people. It's a great opportunity to network. When the podcast episode goes live, you have the opportunity to promote it to your audience, and the host is promoting it to their audience. You can also utilize the podcast interview for repurposing. So you have so much other things that you can be doing outside of even just the podcast interview to maximize the exposure and the relationships that you're building.
Yeah, I love the connections that you make. I love at the end of the interview, I love the question, who do you know?
Mhm.
Whether you're a guest or a host, who do you know that I should also be talking to in this space? Because if you let one connection lead to two more, it starts growing exponentially, and your circle just expands tremendously, and your growth is beyond imagine because you're letting one lead to two, lead to four, lead to eight.
Yep. And everything starts to compound, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's also another area where people don't necessarily take advantage of, right? They will come in and they'll say, okay, I want to do a couple podcasts a month, right? Maybe as a host, you want to put a podcast episode out a week, or even as a guest, maybe you want to do, two podcasts a month. I think what it really comes down to is the consistency, right? Are we being consistent in the long term? Because one thing with podcasting, I feel like sometimes people do is they treat it like other marketing strategies, and it's not. And so the ones that I feel like are so successful are the ones that come in and they're consistent, right? You're putting out an episode even if you're busy. You're putting out you're guesting even if it's at an inconvenient time. It's really being consistent and doing all of the things that you need to do that we just talked about in terms of promotion and repurposing and connecting.
I love consistency. A lot of podcasters ask me about the best day and time to release their episode. And I tell them it really doesn't matter because people are listening on their schedule, not yours, as long as you're consistent. Just pick a
Yep.
day and time and release it consistently at that day and time so people get in the habit of spending time with you every week. So let's talk a little bit about the benefit and the differences of podcasting and having a one-on-one conversation like we are now,
Mhm.
rather than going to a big event, going to a conference, being on stage, being in the hallway, making connections there. What's the benefit of podcast guesting over events and leveraging those?
Yeah, so I think both serve a different purpose. One of the things that I notice, I work with a lot of, busy CEOs, people that we're all busy, right? When I'm doing a podcast interview, right, we've set aside an hour. If I'm going to a conference, you've got to travel somewhere, you've got to take into account, what is the cost involved there? There are various different things that kind of go into comparing the two. I think there are benefits to both, but I think it's really in terms of how do you want to use it, right? When we're on a podcast together, I can take the content that we have after the fact. I tell my clients, they will often say, "Hey, can I get a copy of the video? I'd like to utilize that to promote." At Interview Valet, we do shorts. We have a YouTube channel, and we post shorts of the podcast. Right? We do it every day. And so that gives some additional visibility to, the podcast episode. Whereas if you're going and you're meeting people at a conference, you may not have that, right? Unless you're a guest speaker and you're getting the content from where you're speaking there. But you have the ability to repurpose that in a way that, you wouldn't if you had an in-person event.
So when you're going to an event, you kind of understand it's a conference for doctors, or it's a
Mhm.
conference for accountants or podcasters or whatever it might be. Earlier, you mentioned you're not trying to get in front of the largest audience, you're trying to get in front of the right audience. How do you make sure that the podcast you're going on is the right audience for you?
So I think really getting clear on who your target audience is really important, right? As I mentioned before, clients will come to me and say, "I want to get in front of entrepreneurs." That's great, but what kind of entrepreneurs? So I'm doing at Interview Valley, I'm doing the legwork to see who is the audience of this particular podcast. So we source multiple databases to find out who are the people that are listening to this particular podcast. I had a client previously, he was a keynote speaker. And so he came to us looking to do a campaign of 24 as he was promoting his book. What we
What
did
is a
with his,
campaign of 24?
yeah, so he did 24 podcast interviews
Got it. Okay.
over, I think it was like 12 months. And
Perfect.
so what we did is he gave me Speakers Bureau websites. I was able to take those websites, put it into one of our databases, and I was able to see what podcasts the people that visited that website listened to. So I could then target
Wow.
and put him in front of his ideal audience based on that. So he was getting in front of the exact people that he wanted to. It wasn't guessing. So we were able to position his book and position him as a keynote speaker in front of the perfect audience.
That's great because I get so many solicitations from people
Yes.
that make no sense. For the first 250 episodes of my show, it was just me. I didn't interview anybody, and I got solicitations all the time about, "Hey, my client would be a great guest for your show." And I'm like, "Really? Which guest was your favorite?" Because I don't interview anybody.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy how you just get spammed like that all the time.
Oh yeah, it's like AI slop. I see it all the time. I even had someone, obviously, they were like, "I've heard you on a podcast and I was wondering if you wanted help guesting." And I'm like, "Did you even look at my like the at Interview Valet to know that, like, not that we're competitors, because I don't consider that competition, but did you even look at who you're reaching out to?" And I've even spoke to hosts. Joe Saul Say Hi of Stacking Benjamins. He actually tagged me and Tom, our CEO, because he gets AI pitches and it'll say, "Hey Stacking," or "Hi Benjamin," or "Hi whatever." And it's like AI, right? I see on my Facebook, it's like, "Let us help you pitch yourself to 3.8 million podcasts." And I can't do anything but laugh because I'm like, A, who wants to be on 3.8 million podcasts? Number one. And number two, there's no strategy behind it. It's not just going on a podcast and having a conversation. That's a hobby. If you're going on a podcast, let's make it count.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so that's the difference between a good and a bad show. What's the difference between a good and a bad guest? How do you be a good guest when you're getting on shows?
Okay. So I think you show up and you are a gracious guest. I look at it as being a guest in someone's home. I had a client and she shared with me that she was a guest on a podcast and the host had provided her with the questions beforehand. And she told the host, I will answer the questions in order. And when I'm done answering the questions, I will nod my head so you know that it's okay to go on to the next question. And I was like, I was floored because I was like, you're a guest on a podcast that someone else is a host of and you're taking control. So don't do that. But it's really showing up, being prepared, knowing the audience, knowing your stuff that you want to talk about, and providing value. I think coming from a place of wanting to share your knowledge is more important than wanting to sell something. You never want to show up and be overly aggressive or overly salesy. 99% of the time, the host is going to say at the end of the podcast, where can our listeners find you? You know, what is your offer for them? Save that till the end. Really come from a place of service to the host and service to the listeners.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. People just want to promote the book. Well, if you got to read the book to find out, or they're just trying to get to the offer. And I always coach podcasters it's your show, you control it. And if
Yep.
you have the great thing about it being recorded is you can stop
Mhm.
and reposition and reset and start again. And I typically recommend they do it 3 times. The first time you just stop and you say, hey, look, I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to get to your product and your pitch. I just want this to be a conversation. Let's stop trying to take control of the situation. And then the second time, it's like, hey, if this keeps up, I'm not going to be able to use this interview at all because this isn't anything that my audience is going to be interested in. And then the third time, you just have to cut ties and call
Mhm.
it a day and move along. But there are those guests that want to just take control of it. John Lee Dumas told a story at Podcast Movement a few years ago when he interviewed Gene Simmons, and Gene Simmons was very much the controlling guest kind of guy,
Mhm.
and John just talked about how challenging it was to navigate him through a conversation because he was late to the call, he wasn't prepared, and it was challenging, and so you just have to decide if the guest is worth it or not. Well,
Mhm.
if you're going to just go through that, when you're trying to be a guest on shows, what are the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs and coaches run into when they're trying to be a guest?
I think one of the things that I've noticed over the past, I would say probably 6 months to a year, is that and as I'm looking at potential shows for my clients, I'm looking at consistency. I'm looking at the content, right? So is it aligned with your brand? Some of the questions that we ask, at the very beginning, when we meet new clients is, are you okay if there's a podcast episode that's marked E? Are you okay if there's like religious connotations? We want to know those things. So, really making sure that whatever podcast you're on is going to be a good representative of who you are and what your brand is. I also would recommend to anyone looking to be a guest, listen to the episodes, get a feel for the host, get a feel for their style. Make sure it's a conversation that you want to have. I often call myself the podcast matchmaker because as I'm looking at podcasts for my clients, I'm not just looking at can they have a good conversation? Just about anyone can have a good conversation. I want to know, like, are you two going to provide value to each other? And is this going to be a worthwhile relationship to help my clients meet their goals and to provide value to the host and the listeners of that podcast?
If you were to start this journey all over again in podcasting, jumping into it cold, know nothing about it, what would you have done differently?
Um, I think I would have been a little more confident in the beginning. So I know, and probably everyone says this, right? If I went back and looked at my first episode, so I started out like we did rotating hosts for our internal podcast at Interview Valet. It's called the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. And I did one of the first couple of episodes and I was the host. And I remember, thank God it was my client and I had a great relationship with her. We had to schedule 3 separate times. I had internet issues. I couldn't figure out Riverside. It was a mess. It was a disaster. And so I think making sure that you have all of the basics before you hit record, before you're a guest, before you're a host, before anything, and really going in and having that confidence can make or break the entire experience, because at the end of the day it should be fun, it should be a great conversation. So I would just say it boils down to the confidence piece.
That's awesome. Love that. Great tips. Um, on a completely different note and sidetrack, we have two little rescue dogs here at home. One's a little Yorkie and one's a little, we don't know, sort of mix we got from the pound. And I know that you have a few rescue dogs. Tell me
Yeah.
about how you got into being a mom of two rescues.
Yeah. So very early on, I just have a soft spot. Like I love dogs. My husband loves dogs. And so we've always had rescue dogs. In fact, they're sleeping next to me. I'm always nervous that I have a puppy. So I have Remy that is about 7 months old. We just adopted him over I guess it was Labor Day. And he was just, we saw him as a puppy and he was just adorable. So we were like, we need to have him. We had lost another dog. And so it was time to have our second. And then we have just another dog that we actually got from the same exact rescue. My husband's military, so we move often. And so it's very ironic to have them from the same rescue, but they were rescued from the same rescue about 7 years apart.
That's great.
Yeah.
We've had rescues for quite some time. We've probably had maybe six rescue dogs.
Hmm.
And they've a couple of them have come from the same rescue, but a couple of them just they show up when they're supposed to show up. And they appear in our lives, and they've been
Yeah.
fantastic.
Have you seen those? I don't, it's like on social media where they have these events at shelters where people will sit in a circle and the dog chooses their person.
No, I haven't seen
Oh
that.
my gosh. I'm like, if I ever, and I love my dogs, I never want them to leave me. But if I ever am, and like, if I ever need another dog, I want to go do this because I'm like, how incredible is that they like pick their people? And I truly believe that with our older one, Fifi, we were obsessed with her brother. Like I wanted a boy dog, my kids wanted a boy dog. Um, the rescue told us like, sorry, he's taken, he's spoken for. We went there to meet her, and we met her and we just instantly fell in love. And then they called us back and they were like, okay, his adoption fell through, he's now available. And we were like, absolutely not. Like we know she's ours. And she is like, she's a Velcro. Like she is all like always near me. So
That's great.
yeah.
Nothing like the love of a dog.
Yes.
Um, Back to podcasting.
Yeah.
If you have a great resource there at Interview Valet where you'll offer a free podcast interview audit. Tell me what happens with that. How does that whole thing work?
Yeah. So the audit, what it does is it'll give you insights on a couple of different things. So number one, it'll tell you your share of the conversation, right? We want people to be mindful of like if you have 80% of the conversation and the host has 20%, that's probably not the best like, metrics, right? We want to get it as close to like 50-50 as possible so it's more of a conversation. Um,
Yeah,
so we're sharing that so that you can be mindful of that. There are also filler words. If you notice, I personally, and I'm aware of it, but it's just something I do. So we share filler words so that as you're a guest on podcasts or even as a host, you can see, okay, I'm using the word a whole lot, and I should probably be a little mindful of that. We're also looking at that first foundational question that I mentioned before, right? So if a host asks you, tell us about yourself, we don't want you to go on a 5-minute monologue of everything you've ever done in your life. We want you to be able to answer that question in a way that connects you with the audience. We also look at how long are you taking to answer a question, right? We don't want you to spend 10 minutes answering a question while the host is sitting there waiting to respond, or vice versa. And so it's really just some kind of feedback that we can provide to allow you to have a better sense of, what went well and what it is that you could do better. I think self-awareness is something that we could all use and be knowledgeable about so that we can be an even better guest in the future.
So does a podcaster provide you with the audio or a link to the podcast or a transcript? How does that work?
We have it set up. So Tom has gone in and set it up where we can pull the transcript and it'll go through and give us all the information.
So I just tell you which episode it is and you go and run the whole thing on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fantastic. How can people get their hands on that?
So if you go and visit, I have a landing page. You can find me at interviewvalet.com. And it's /Kristen, Kristen. Don't spell my name wrong. Everyone always spells it with an I. So it's Kristen. And there you'll be able to find the interview audit. You'll be able to find a free copy of Tom's book, How Podcast Guest Profits. And then you'll also be able to learn more about Interview Valet. And you'll have all of my contact information on social media. I would love to connect with you.
That's fantastic. That's interviewvalet.com/Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
That is amazing. What's next for you down the road? What are you working on?
I am actually I just more clients. I have a new client later this afternoon and just learning and growing and strategizing.
Fantastic. Well, I truly appreciate you taking time with us today, sharing all your insights. I love everything and I love your two little rescues. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
Oh, wasn't that a great interview with Kristen? So grateful that she took the time with us today. Make sure you get your hands on that podcast interview audit. That will help you determine how to make your podcast interviews even stronger. You can get that over at interviewvalet.com/Kristen. That link is also over in the show notes as well. Get your hands on that and start taking your podcast interviews to the next level. All right, so let me help you out as well. You've published all your episodes. You've stayed consistent. You know your content is good, but yet you're not being seen as the authority in your niche. Your podcast isn't creating that level of influence and impact or opportunity that you expected it would when you first launched it. People listen to your show, but they don't take action. And unfortunately, maybe you sound professional, but you're not unforgettable. Well, we can change all of that because the truth is consistency alone doesn't create authority. Intentional leadership does. And there are gaps in your podcast and in your content that we can fix. We just have to figure out where they are. If you're ready to turn your podcast into a lead generating machine and revenue engine and not just more content, well, I'd love to help you out. If you'd like to become an influential leader in your niche who has status and impact, let me help you do that. Let me audit your podcast so we can find the authority gaps in your show. If you head over to podcasttalentcoach.com/coaching, you can click the button right there and apply to have a chat with me. We will sit down, we'll uncover your authority positioning problem, we'll develop a plan to help you succeed, and then we'll have a conversation about how I can help and support you to achieve those goals. It's all over at podcasttalentcoach.com/coaching. Get the details right there. Can't wait until we do it all again next time. Until then, step into your authority and we'll see you next time.